Elias Thorne, a titan of industry, laughed off a distant whimpering, just a child's tantrum, he believed. Then his daughter's terrified plea, "Please, cleaner, I can't breathe," froze his world forever. The roar of the private jet's engine still echoed faintly in Elias Thorne's ears as his luxury SUV glided effortlessly through the wrought-iron gates of his sprawling estate. The city lights, a distant shimmer against the twilight sky, seemed to mock the profound emptiness that had settled within him since his wife's tragic departure during childbirth. He was a man who commanded boardrooms with an iron will, his name synonymous with innovation and immense wealth, yet within the gilded cage of his own home, he often felt a pervasive chill, a silence that spoke volumes of a life unlived, a heart that had long forgotten how to fully beat. His constant travel, his relentless pursuit of the next deal, had become a shield, a way to numb the gnawing grief that had left him with 2 young children. Lily, a delicate 6-year-old, and baby Leo, a tiny, vulnerable soul who had never known his mother's embrace. He told himself it was for them, this empire he was building, a legacy to secure their future, but deep down, a part of him knew it was an escape, a desperate flight from the emotional wreckage of his past. Stepping into the cavernous foyer, Elias expected the usual bustling warmth, perhaps the distant sound of Mariana, the housekeeper, humming a tune as she tidied, or the soft chatter of Lily playing. Instead, an unnerving silence enveloped him, thick and heavy, pressing in from all sides. The grand marble floors, usually reflecting sunlight, now mirrored only the muted glow of the evening, amplifying the eerie quiet. A prickle of unease, faint at first, began to crawl up his spine, a premonition that whispered of something amiss. He called out, his voice echoing hollowly, "Mariana? Lily? I'm home." No response came, only the lingering silence, a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. He walked past the grand staircase, his expensive Italian leather shoes making barely a sound, his gaze sweeping over the pristine, yet sterile, surroundings. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension, and a growing knot tightened in his stomach. Then from the floor above, a sound, faint and fragile, reached him, a tiny, almost imperceptible whimper like a wounded bird. It was Lily's room, he knew instantly, and his heart, usually so guarded, lurched with a sudden sharp fear he hadn't felt in years. He ascended the stairs 2 at a time, his mind racing, 1,000 possibilities, none of them good, flashing through his thoughts. He pushed open the door to Lily's room, a room usually filled with the bright colors of childhood and the scent of lavender, and the sight that greeted him froze the blood in his veins, rendering him utterly immobile. Lily, his precious Lily, lay crumpled on her bed, her small body rigid with terror, her face a ghastly pale, her eyes wide and staring, fixed on something unseen. Her lips trembled, barely moving, and a sound, so faint it was almost swallowed by the silence, escaped them. "Please, cleaner. I can't breathe." Standing over her, a shadow against the fading light from the window, was Mariana, her usually placid features contorted into a chilling mask of triumph, a hand held suspiciously close to Lily's mouth, though not quite touching. The air around them crackled with an unspoken menace, a palpable evil that made Elias's breath catch in his own throat. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed, with a sickening jolt, faint, violet bruises blossoming on Lily's delicate wrists, stark against her pale skin. The horrifying truth, a truth too monstrous to contemplate, began to unravel itself in the pit of his stomach. A predator, he realized with crushing guilt, had been allowed into his home, into the very heart of his family. Under his own misguided watch, a primal guttural sound tore from Ilias's throat, a sound he hadn't known he possessed, stripping away the veneer of the detached magnate and revealing the raw, terrified father beneath. "Stop." The single word ripped through the suffocating silence of the room, sharp as a shard of ice, echoing with a fury that made the very air vibrate. Mariana flinched, her hand retracting from Lily's vicinity with a startling swiftness, her mask of chilling triumph dissolving instantly into an expression of feigned concern, her eyes widening, though a flicker of something colder, something reptilian, still lingered in their depths. Lily, however, remained frozen, her gaze still fixed, not on Mariana but on some invisible horror, her small body trembling uncontrollably, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Elias rushed forward, his expensive briefcase thudding forgotten to the plush carpet, his world shrinking to the desperate, fragile form of his daughter. He knelt beside the bed, his strong hands, usually accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar deals, now shaking as he gently cupped Lily's face, tracing the faint, almost imperceptible lines of fear etched around her mouth. His heart ached with a pain so profound it threatened to buckle him. How could he have been so blind, so utterly consumed by his own shadow of grief and ambition, to miss the insidious darkness festering right beneath his roof. His wife's departure, a void that had swallowed his emotional landscape whole, had left him adrift, clinging to work as a lifeline, believing that providing material wealth was the ultimate expression of love. He had built an empire, yes, but at what cost? He had cloaked his absence in the guise of securing their future, convincing himself that his tireless pursuit of success was for Lily and Leo, a bulwark against the harsh realities of a world without their mother. Yet in his self-imposed emotional exile, he had allowed a wolf in sheep's clothing to roam freely, to prey upon the very innocence he swore to protect. The image of Mariana, seemingly so solicitous, so dedicated, always with a comforting word or a gentle hand, now twisted into a grotesque caricature of deceit. Mariana, a woman who had presented herself as a godsend in the chaotic aftermath of his wife's passing, had initially been a beacon of calm efficiency. She spoke with a soft, reassuring voice, her movements precise and quiet, tending to the needs of the household with an almost maternal diligence that Elias, in his fog of sorrow, had gratefully accepted as genuine. She had come highly recommended, a distant relative of a former employee, painting a picture of a life touched by hardship, but imbued with an unwavering work ethic. He had seen only her outward devotion, her meticulous care for baby Leo, her patient attempts to engage Lily. All of it a carefully constructed performance designed to lull him into a false sense of security. Beneath that veneer of gentle servitude, however, lay a calculating mind, fueled by a corrosive blend of resentment and a hunger for control, a simmering bitterness at her own perceived misfortunes that she projected onto the vulnerable family before her. She saw not children to be nurtured, but pawns in a grander scheme, a means to elevate herself from her humble beginnings, to perhaps even lay claim to a slice of the vast thorn fortune. Elias's gaze, now sharp and penetrating, finally lifted from Lily to Mariana, a silent accusation burning in his eyes. Mariana, ever the actress, had composed herself, her hands clasped demurely, her head tilted slightly, a picture of worried innocence. "Mr. Thorne, you're home early," she began, her voice a practiced murmur, devoid of any genuine surprise. Lily was just having a little nightmare, a bad dream about a monster under her bed. I was trying to comfort her. Her words, once soothing, now grated on Elias's ears, each syllable a fresh insult to his intelligence, a cruel mockery of his daughter's terror. He could practically taste the lie in the air, a metallic tong that mingled with the lingering scent of fear. He remembered the faint whimper, the rigid terror, Lily's desperate plea, "Please, cleaner, I can't breathe." And the violet bruises. This was no nightmare. This was a waking horror orchestrated by the woman standing before him. His eyes swept over Lily's small form, her chest still heaving slightly, her breath still catching. And then to baby Leo's nursery door just down the hall, suddenly feeling a cold dread for his infant son. Leo, so innocent, so utterly dependent, was also under Mariana's care. A new wave of guilt washed over him, colder, sharper than before. He had been so preoccupied with his own sorrow, with the relentless demands of his empire, that he had failed to see the most obvious, the most vital truth. His children, robbed of their mother's unconditional love, were now being robbed of their sense of safety and peace by the very person entrusted to protect them. The time for detached observation was over. The time for action, for a fierce, unwavering commitment to his children, had arrived. He had to become the father they deserved, the protector they desperately needed, and he would begin by unraveling every thread of Mariana's carefully woven deception. Elias knelt by Lily's bed, his touch feathered light as he stroked her hair, his eyes scanning her small, trembling form. The faint violet bruises on her wrists, barely visible in the dim light, now seemed to pulse with an undeniable, sickening clarity. His gaze lingered on the fragile skin, imagining the force, the cruel grip that must have left such marks. A cold fury, slow and simmering, began to replace the initial shock and terror, hardening his resolve. He spoke softly, his voice a gravelly whisper, a stark contrast to the booming authority he wielded in boardrooms, asking Lily what had happened, who had hurt her, promising her that he was there now, that she was safe. Lily, however, remained utterly paralyzed by fear, her eyes wide and fixed, unable to meet his gaze, her small body still rigid. She merely shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and then buried her face into his chest, her small hands clutching his shirt as if he were her only anchor in a storm. The unspoken terror in her silence was more potent than any scream, a testament to the chilling power Mariana held over her. Mariana, meanwhile, had retreated a step, her hands still clasped, her expression a carefully crafted mosaic of concern and mild offense. She began to explain again, her voice a low, soothing drone, about Lily's recurring nightmares, about how she'd been trying to calm the child, perhaps holding her gently to prevent her from hurting herself in her sleep. Elias listened, or pretended to, his mind dissecting every word, every subtle shift in her tone, searching for the cracks in her polished facade. He felt the weight of his own profound absence, the countless nights he had spent away chasing deals, building his empire, while this woman, this viper, had been left unchecked in his sanctuary. The guilt was a suffocating blanket pressing down on him, but it also fueled a fierce, unyielding determination. Would not allow this to continue, not for another moment. He would uncover every truth, no matter how painful, and he would protect his children with every fiber of his being. Over the next few days, Elias transformed. The distant magnate, once lost in his own sorrow, became a shadow, a silent observer in his own home. He canceled all his upcoming business trips, citing an urgent family matter, a decision that sent ripples of shock through his corporate world. He spent every waking moment with Lily and Leo, his presence a constant, comforting anchor. He would sit with Lily for hours, reading to her, playing quiet games, trying to coax her back from the precipice of fear she had fallen into. He watched Mariana with an intensity that would have unnerved anyone else, but she, with her practiced subservience, merely seemed to increase her diligence, her movements becoming even more precise, her smile even more saccharine. Yet Elias noticed things, the way Lily would subtly flinch when Mariana entered a room, the almost imperceptible tremor in the housekeeper's hands when she thought no one was looking, the sudden, unnatural quiet that would descend upon the nursery when Mariana was alone with baby Leo. He began to notice patterns, small, unsettling anomalies that, when strung together, painted a disturbing picture. The nursery door, which he remembered his wife always keeping slightly ajar to hear Leo, was now frequently found latched from the outside, a quiet click he sometimes caught from his study. He found a small, hidden cupboard in Lily's room, tucked behind a loose panel in the wall, where she had apparently stashed a few half-eaten snacks, almost as if she were hiding food. There were also the whispered conversations he overheard between Mariana and someone on the phone, always in hushed tones, always ending abruptly when she sensed his approach, her eyes darting nervously. Elias felt a cold dread begin to solidify in his stomach, confirming his worst suspicions. This was not just a one-time incident. This was a calculated, ongoing campaign of manipulation and cruelty. One evening, while searching for an old photo album in his wife's former study, a room he had largely avoided since her passing, his hand brushed against a loose floorboard beneath her ornate writing desk. Curiosity, now sharpened by suspicion, compelled him to pry it open. Tucked beneath, wrapped in a silk handkerchief, was a small leather-bound journal and a sealed envelope. His heart pounded with a mix of trepidation and desperate hope. The journal contained his wife's elegant script, filled with tender observations about their life, about Lily's first steps, about the joyous anticipation of Leo's arrival. But inside the sealed envelope he found a letter, addressed to him, dated just weeks before her tragic departure. His wife's familiar handwriting, usually so vibrant, now seemed imbued with a subtle, almost melancholic urgency. She wrote of her deep love for him and the children, of her hopes for their future. But then her words shifted, becoming more cautious, more thoughtful. She mentioned Mariana, initially praising her efficiency, but then subtly hinting at a growing unease, a feeling she couldn't quite articulate, a sense that something about the housekeeper's devotion felt a little too perfect, a little too rehearsed. There was no direct accusation, no concrete evidence, but her intuition. A quality Elias had always admired in her, now shone through the pages like a beacon, a silent warning from beyond. Reading her words, Elias felt a profound sorrow, not just for her loss, but for his own blindness. His wife, even in her delicate state, had possessed a clarity he had utterly lacked. She had seen the faint shadows where he had seen only light, heard the discordant notes where he had heard only harmony. The letter was a ghost of her wisdom, a final gift, urging him to look closer, to trust his instincts, to protect their children with an vigilance he had until now failed to provide. It was the catalyst he needed, the undeniable push that transformed his dawning suspicion into an unshakable conviction. He would not rest until Mariana's true nature was exposed, until justice was served, and until his children could finally breathe freely, truly safe within the walls of their own home. The game had changed, and Elias Thorne, the grieving, absent father, was now a man on a mission, fueled by a love he had almost forgotten he possessed. Elias Thorne, once a man whose gaze rarely strayed from the flickering screens of financial markets, now possessed an acuity honed by a father's primal fear and a husband's spectral warning. His wife's letter, a tender whisper from the beyond, had ignited a fire in his soul, burning away the last vestiges of his self-imposed detachment. He began to operate with the quiet precision of a predator, yet his purpose was purely defensive, a shield forged from unwavering love. His vast technological empire, usually a means to acquire more wealth, now became an arsenal for protection. Discrete cameras, already integrated into his mansion's sophisticated security system, were recalibrated, their lenses now focusing with chilling clarity on the interactions between Mariana and his children. He monitored every digital footprint, every communication that passed through his network, sifting through data with a relentless focus, searching for the telltale signs of deception, the hidden threads of a sinister plot. The house, once a symbol of his sorrow, was transforming into a silent witness, its walls and wires listening, watching. Mariana, oblivious to the invisible net tightening around her, continued her performance, though a subtle shift began to ripple through her carefully constructed facade. Under Elias's constant, almost unnerving presence, her subservience became tinged with an undercurrent of impatience, a flicker of irritation in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. She would still offer her saccharine smiles and her practiced murmurs of concern, especially when Elias was near, but he noticed the increasing frequency of her hurried phone calls, always taken in hushed tones, always ending abruptly with a nervous glance over her shoulder. He observed her lingering a little too long in his study, her fingers brushing against valuable heirlooms, her gaze sweeping over financial documents left carelessly on his desk, a calculated carelessness on Elias's part, a lure to expose her true avarice. The subtle signs of her greed, once obscured by his grief, now shone with a stark, undeniable clarity, confirming his wife's unspoken intuition. One afternoon, Elias overheard a fragmented conversation from the kitchen. Mariana's voice, usually soft, now sharper, edged with a barely contained frustration. She spoke of delays and impatience, of promises of a better life, mentioning the children's future in a way that twisted his stomach. It wasn't the protective tone of a caregiver, but the calculating inflection of someone discussing an asset, a commodity to be leveraged. He also noticed a peculiar habit. Mariana would often lock herself in her room for extended periods, emerging with a renewed, almost manic energy, her eyes holding a glint he couldn't quite decipher, a spark of avarice that belied her humble demeanor. He remembered the small hidden cupboard in Lily's room, and a cold dread settled over him. Lily's fear was not just a reaction to isolated incidents. It was a response to an ongoing, systemic cruelty, an emotional starvation designed to break her spirit. His focus, however, remained anchored to his children, particularly Lily. He spent countless hours by her side, his large hand a comforting presence on her small back as she slept, his voice a steady murmur of stories and lullabies. Slowly, painstakingly, the rigid fear that had gripped Lily began to loosen its hold. She still flinched at sudden movements, and her eyes would dart nervously whenever Mariana entered the room, but she started to lean into Elias's touch, to seek out his presence. One evening, as he read her a story, she reached out a small, trembling hand and placed it in his, her fingers curling around his with a fragile trust. It was a silent plea, a desperate affirmation that she recognized him, her father, as her safe harbor. That night, for the first time since his return, Lily slept soundly, her breathing even, her nightmares momentarily banished by the warmth of his unwavering presence. As Elias delved deeper into the digital trails, he uncovered a series of anomalies that sent a chill down his spine. Mariana, a woman of seemingly modest means, had been making substantial, regular transfers to an offshore account, far exceeding anything her salary could justify. He cross-referenced these transactions with his own financial records, noticing small but consistent discrepancies, minor withdrawals, inflated receipts for household expenses, all meticulously disguised, designed to remain unnoticed amidst the vastness of his fortune. The pattern was clear, a slow, insidious siphoning of funds, a calculated theft occurring right under his nose. The sheer audacity of her scheme, coupled with the emotional abuse inflicted upon his children, fueled his righteous anger. It wasn't just about money. It was about a profound betrayal of trust, a desecration of his home, a calculated assault on his family's well-being. He gathered the evidence, each piece a silent, damning testament to Mariana's duplicity, knowing that the time for observation was drawing to a close, and the moment for confrontation was fast approaching. Elias's meticulous surveillance revealed a tapestry of deceit woven with chilling precision. The discreet cameras, once a mere security measure, now captured fleeting moments that spoke volumes. He saw Mariana's smile falter into a sneer when she thought Lily wasn't looking, her hand hovering menacingly close to the child's face before retreating just as Elias's footsteps approached. He watched as she would often leave Leo in his crib for extended periods, the baby's soft cries echoing unheard, while she busied herself with trivial tasks, her back turned, a cold indifference in her posture. The financial irregularities he had unearthed were not just isolated incidents of petty theft. They were part of a larger, more intricate web, He discovered a pattern of investments in a shell company, a company that, upon deeper investigation, was linked to a distant, estranged relative of Mariana's, a man with a dubious past and a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals. Her motive, once a murky blend of resentment and opportunism, now crystallized into a calculated scheme to siphon off his fortune, perhaps even to gain guardianship of his children, positioning herself as their sole protector should something unforeseen happen to him. The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins, a horrifying realization of the depth of her depravity. The house, once a silent monument to his grief, was now alive with a palpable tension. Mariana, sensing the subtle shift in Ilias's demeanor, the unwavering intensity of his gaze, began to unravel, her composure fraying at the edges. Her movements became more abrupt, her voice occasionally sharper, particularly when she addressed Lily, though she would quickly soften it if Elias was within earshot. She still maintained her facade of devoted care. The cracks were beginning to show, thin fissures in the polished surface of her deception. Elias observed her meticulously, his presence a silent, suffocating weight that chipped away at her carefully constructed calm. He knew he had to push her, to force her hand, to make her reveal the full extent of her cruelty. He began to leave documents pertaining to his will and estate planning conspicuously on his desk, knowing her insatiable greed would compel her to examine them, to confirm her imagined future. He watched through the hidden cameras as her eyes would linger on the clauses, her lips moving silently, a hungry glint in her gaze, a predatory satisfaction that made his stomach churn. One night, unable to sleep, Elias found himself drawn to Lily's room. The soft glow of a nightlight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, and Lily lay restless, whimpering softly in her sleep. He sat beside her bed, his hand gently stroking her forehead, murmuring words of comfort. Slowly her eyes fluttered open, wide and filled with a lingering fear. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since his return, and something in her gaze shifted, a tiny spark of trust replacing the paralyzing terror. She reached for his hand, her small fingers clutching his with a surprising strength. He asked her softly, his voice barely a whisper, what Mariana did, what made her so afraid. Lily hesitated, her eyes darting towards the door, then back to him. Her voice, fragile and barely audible, finally broke the silence. She spoke of Mariana's quiet footsteps, her cold hands, of being told she was a bad girl, of being locked in her room alone when she cried, of being made to feel small and invisible. She mentioned a specific game Mariana played, a suffocating game where she would press a pillow close to Lily's face, telling her to be quiet, to stop making noise, to be a good girl, until Lily couldn't breathe. The words, delivered with the innocent, unvarnished truth of a child, were a punch to Elias's gut, a confirmation of his darkest fears, painting a vivid, horrifying picture of the abuse. A silent, incandescent rage ignited within Elias, a fire that burned away the last vestiges of his guilt and self-reproach, leaving only a fierce, unyielding resolve. His daughter's confession, whispered in the hushed intimacy of the night, was the final, undeniable piece of the puzzle. He now had not only the irrefutable visual and financial evidence of Mariana's calculated greed and neglect, but also the raw, emotional testimony of his own child, a truth that resonated with the spectral warning in his late wife's letter. He held Lily close, burying his face in her soft hair, inhaling the innocent scent of her childhood, promising her silently with every beat of his heart that this nightmare would end, that she would never again feel fear within the walls of her home. The path forward was clear, though daunting. He knew a confrontation was inevitable, but it would not be a private, emotional outburst. It would be a formal, unassailable pursuit of justice, meticulously planned and executed, leaving no room for doubt or escape. The next morning, Elias moved with a quiet, purposeful energy. He contacted his legal team, some of the most formidable minds in the country, instructing them to prepare a case with absolute discretion and unwavering precision. He compiled every piece of evidence, the financial records detailing the offshore transfers, the inflated receipts, the meticulously time-stamped surveillance footage capturing Mariana's cruel indifference towards Leo and her subtle acts of intimidation towards Lily, and now Lily's own words, carefully documented by a child psychologist he had discreetly brought in. He also remembered a small antique locket his wife had always worn, a sentimental piece that had mysteriously vanished after her passing, a piece he had subconsciously attributed to the chaos of the immediate aftermath. Now a nagging suspicion led him to Mariana's room. Underneath a loose floorboard, concealed beneath a stack of old magazines, he found it, his wife's locket tucked away, a silent testament to Mariana's avarice, a tangible link to her betrayal. It wasn't just about money or power, it was about a profound disrespect, a desecration of his family's memory. The stage was set not for a quiet dismissal, but for a dramatic confrontation that would expose Mariana's true nature to the world and reclaim the innocence she had so cruelly attempted to steal. The world outside the Thorne estate continued its relentless spin, oblivious to the silent storm brewing within its opulent walls. Elias, no longer a phantom haunting his own grief, moved with a quiet, formidable purpose. His legal team, a formidable assembly of sharp minds, worked with an unseen efficiency, meticulously piecing together the narrative of Mariana's insidious betrayal. Every surveillance clip, every financial discrepancy, every word whispered by Lily, was woven into an undeniable tapestry of deceit. The antique locket, a tangible piece of his wife's memory found so callously hidden, lay among the evidence, a cold, hard truth speaking volumes of Mariana's profound disrespect and calculating avarice. Elias spent his days immersed in the quiet work of justice, but his evenings were devoted entirely to his children, rebuilding the fragile bonds that had been so cruelly fractured. He would sit by Lily's bed, reading stories in a low, comforting voice, watching her eyelids grow heavy, a small, trusting hand often finding his in the darkness. He would cradle baby Leo, feeling the warmth of his son's tiny body, a profound connection stirring within him, a love that was both fierce and tender, a stark contrast to the cold calculations of the woman he was preparing to face. Mariana, a creature of instinct and ingrained manipulation, could feel the shift in the air, a subtle but palpable change in the atmosphere of the house. Elias's constant presence, once a source of irritation, now felt like a suffocating weight. His gaze, once distant, now held an unnerving clarity, a silent accusation that pierced through her carefully constructed facade. She redoubled her efforts, her smiles becoming wider, her solicitousness more pronounced, almost frantic in its intensity. She would bring Elias's coffee with an extra flourish, offer unsolicited advice on Lily's meals, and fuss over Leo with an exaggerated tenderness. All while her mind raced, searching for the source of this unsettling change, the crack in her perfect scheme. Yet the subtle signs of her unraveling were becoming more frequent, a tremor in her hand as she poured Elias's tea, a sharp, almost imperceptible intake of breath when he mentioned a specific financial report, the way her eyes would dart to the hidden cameras, a fleeting moment of suspicion before she quickly composed herself. The house, once her domain, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in. One crisp morning, the quiet hum of the mansion was pierced by the sharp, authoritative ring of the doorbell. Elias, his expression unreadable, had anticipated this moment. He watched from the top of the grand staircase as Mariana, ever the diligent housekeeper, moved to answer it. Standing on the pristine marble steps framed by the ornate doorway were two stern-faced individuals in dark suits, flanked by a uniformed officer. Their presence alone was a stark, undeniable declaration. Mariana's practiced smile faltered, her eyes widening with a flicker of genuine fear as one of the individuals, a woman with an unflinching gaze, extended a thick envelope towards her. "Mariana Silva," the woman stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "You are hereby served with a civil complaint and a temporary restraining order, effective immediately. You are to vacate these premises and have no further contact with Elias Thorne or his children." The words hung in the air, heavy and final, shattering Mariana's world into 1,000 shards. Her face, usually a canvas of feigned composure, contorted into a mask of disbelief and raw panic. She clutched the envelope, her fingers trembling violently, her gaze darting from the legal documents to Elias, who now stood at the bottom of the staircase, his presence a silent, unwavering pillar of justice. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound sadness, a testament to the innocence that had been betrayed. Mariana's mind, usually so sharp and calculating, struggled to comprehend the abrupt collapse of her meticulously crafted reality. The dreams of wealth, of control, of her imagined future, evaporated in an instant, replaced by the chilling certainty of exposure. Her carefully constructed life of deceit, built on the vulnerability of a grieving father and the innocence of his children, was now crumbling around her, piece by agonizing piece. A guttural sound escaped Mariana's throat, a strangled cry that was a bizarre mixture of outrage and fear. She tried to speak, to protest, to revert to her familiar role of the wronged, devoted caregiver, but her voice failed her, choked by the sudden, overwhelming realization of her defeat. The legal team, impassive and professional, merely gestured towards the door, their message clear and absolute. Elias remained silent, his gaze fixed, not on Mariana, but on Lily, who had emerged from her room. Drawn by the commotion, her small hand clutching a worn teddy bear, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and a nascent sense of relief. In that moment, the power shifted irrevocably. The house, once a stage for Mariana's manipulations, was now a sanctuary, slowly but surely reclaiming its true purpose under Ilias's protective watch. The confrontation was just beginning, the first tremor before the earthquake, but the wheels of justice, set in motion by a father's fierce love, were now turning with an unstoppable momentum. Mariana stood frozen, the thick envelope a damning weight in her hand, her mind struggling to reconcile the carefully constructed world of her ambition with the stark, unyielding reality unfolding before her. The woman from the legal team, her voice a steel-edged pronouncement, reiterated the terms of the restraining order, the words echoing in the sudden cavernous silence of the grand foyer. Mariana's gaze, wild and desperate, finally landed on Elias, who stood at the foot of the staircase, a silent sentinel of justice. She searched his eyes for a flicker of doubt, a hint of the grief-stricken, oblivious man she had so easily manipulated, but found only an unwavering resolve, a profound sorrow that spoke of a deep, unshakable conviction. A tremor ran through her, a cold realization that her reign of quiet terror was over, that the carefully woven tapestry of her lies had been ripped apart. She tried to deny, to argue, to plead her innocence, but the words caught in her throat, strangled by the sheer weight of her deceit. The legal representatives, unperturbed by her silent struggle, calmly explained the next steps, their voices measured and professional, outlining the impending formal proceedings. They offered her a moment to gather her personal belongings, but their presence, along with the uniformed officer, ensured there would be no defiance, no last-ditch attempt at manipulation. Mariana's movements were stiff, almost robotic, as she ascended the stairs, her mind a whirlwind of frantic calculations, desperate to salvage some shred of her shattered plan. She cast a venomous glance back at Elias, a silent promise of retribution in her eyes, but he remained impassive, his focus shifting to Lily, who still stood clutching her teddy bear, her small face a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. The moment Mariana's presence vanished from the house, a palpable lightness filled the air, as if a heavy, suffocating blanket had been lifted, allowing the first tentative breaths of freedom to be drawn. Elias immediately enveloped Lily in a gentle hug, feeling the fragile tremor in her small body, murmuring words of comfort and reassurance. He explained, simply and truthfully, that Mariana would not be returning, that their home was safe now, filled only with love. Lily, her eyes still wide with the residual fear of recent events, slowly relaxed into his embrace, a soft sigh escaping her lips, a tiny but significant step on her long journey toward healing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of focused activity for Elias. His legal team, led by the formidable Miss Ramirez, worked tirelessly, meticulously preparing the case. They had gathered an overwhelming array of evidence, bank statements detailing the illicit offshore transfers, inflated receipts for services never rendered, expert testimony from the child psychologist, who had carefully documented Lily's whispered confessions, and the chilling surveillance footage that captured Mariana's subtle cruelty and her neglect of baby Leo. Each piece was a damning indictment, leaving no room for doubt about her calculated malevolence. Mariana, despite the restraining order, did not vanish quietly. From a distance, she attempted to sow seeds of doubt, contacting old acquaintances and even some of Ilias's less scrupulous business rivals, trying to paint herself as the victim of a powerful man's vindictive wrath. She spun tales of false accusations of a wealthy widower driven mad by grief, attempting to discredit Elias and undermine the impending legal proceedings. However, her attempts were clumsy, lacking the careful precision of her earlier manipulations within the mansion. Her desperation made her reckless, her lies transparent, and her efforts only served to further solidify the case against her, providing additional evidence of her manipulative nature. Ilias's legal team meticulously documented every one of her desperate communications, transforming her attempts at sabotage into further proof of her calculated deceit. Meanwhile, within the quiet sanctuary of their home, a profound transformation was unfolding. Elias, shedding the last vestiges of his workaholic detachment, immersed himself completely in his children's lives. He discovered a joy he hadn't known was possible, a deep, resonant happiness in the simple acts of fatherhood. He spent hours with Lily, reading her favorite fairy tales, drawing silly pictures, and teaching her how to tend to the small garden outside, watching her small hands carefully nurture budding flowers. Her laughter, once a rare and fragile sound, now echoed through the halls with increasing frequency, a melodic affirmation of her burgeoning healing. Leo, no longer left alone, thrived under Ilias's constant, loving attention, his baby gurgles and joyful cries filling the house with a warmth that had been absent for far too long. Elias learned to change diapers with surprising dexterity, to soothe midnight cries with gentle lullabies, and to find endless fascination in his son's every tiny milestone. The house, once a grand empty shell, was slowly being imbued with the vibrant energy of a truly loving family. Meals became shared moments of connection, filled with Ilyas's patient questions and Lily's eager stories about her day. He cooked for them, simple, wholesome meals, finding a quiet satisfaction in nurturing their bodies as he nurtured their spirits. The memories of his wife, once a source of paralyzing grief, now became a gentle, guiding presence. Her love a silent force that propelled him forward, reminding him of the precious legacy she had entrusted to his care. He realized that in his grief he had almost lost the very essence of what she had given him. He would often speak of her to Lily, sharing tender anecdotes, ensuring that her memory was a source of comfort and inspiration, not a shadow of sorrow. As the day of the formal confrontation drew nearer, Elias felt a mixture of trepidation and unwavering resolve. He knew the courtroom would be a crucible, a place where the painful truths of Mariana's betrayal would be laid bare for all to see. But he also knew it was a necessary step, a crucial part of their journey towards complete healing and justice. He looked at Lily and Leo, their faces bright with an innocent trust, and knew that every challenge, every painful revelation, would be worth it to protect their fragile hearts and secure their future. The battle ahead was not just for legal victory, it was for the soul of his family, a testament to the enduring power of truth, courage, and unconditional love. The stage was set not for a quiet ending, but for a dramatic unveiling, a public reckoning that would finally bring closure and begin the true process of rebuilding. The courtroom, a stark arena of truth and consequence, hummed with a nervous energy. Elias sat composed, his gaze unwavering, a silent testament to the strength he had found. Miss Ramirez, with her formidable presence, meticulously presented the evidence, each piece a hammer blow against Mariana's deceit. The cold, irrefutable financial documents, the chilling surveillance footage showing Mariana's indifference and subtle cruelty, the child psychologist's empathetic recounting of Lily's whispered fears, and finally the antique locket, a small, glittering symbol of stolen sentiment, all painted a damning portrait. Mariana, seated across the room, watched her carefully constructed world crumble around her. Her composure, once so rigid, finally snapped. A furious guttural cry tore from her lips, a torrent of accusations and self-pity, attempting to portray herself as a victim, but her words were hollow, devoid of the sincerity that might have swayed anyone. The judge, an embodiment of solemn impartiality, listened patiently, then delivered a verdict that echoed the weight of justice. Mariana was found guilty, not just of theft, but of a profound betrayal of trust, her actions against vulnerable children deemed unforgivable. She was sentenced, a just consequence for her calculated cruelty. 2 years unfolded, gentle and restorative, washing away the lingering shadows that had once haunted the Thorne mansion. The grand house, once a silent monument to Ilyas's grief and a stage for Mariana's malevolence, was now a vibrant sanctuary of love and laughter. Elias, no longer the detached magnate, was a father reborn, his heart overflowing with a fierce, protective tenderness. He and Lily spent countless afternoons in the sprawling garden, their hands soiled with earth, planting vibrant flowers, their shared smiles reflecting a deep, unshakable bond. Lily's laughter, once fragile, now rang through the halls with boundless joy, a melody of healing and rediscovered innocence. She would often draw pictures of her family, bright and full of color, always including her mother as a gentle, guiding star in the sky. Baby Leo, now a boisterous toddler with a mischievous twinkle in his eyes, chased butterflies through the sun-drenched lawn, his joyful shouts filling the air. Elias would scoop him up, burying his face in Leo's soft hair, marveling at the boundless energy and pure love that radiated from his son. Family meals were no longer solitary affairs but cherished rituals, filled with animated conversations and the clinking of silverware, a symphony of togetherness. Elias would recount silly stories, listen intently to Lily's adventures at school, and patiently teach Leo to use his spoon, his presence a warm, constant anchor in their lives. The pain of his wife's departure had softened, transforming into a gentle remembrance, her spirit a loving presence that guided him, her legacy thriving in the joyous faces of their children. He had learned that true wealth lay not in fortunes amassed, but in the unwavering embrace of family, in the quiet strength of truth, and in the boundless, unconditional love that had rebuilt their world. This story, a testament to resilience and redemption, makes us ponder, what depths of courage would you find to protect an innocent soul? How do we, as a society, ensure that no child ever whispers, "I can't breathe," in fear? Share your thoughts and join the conversation. Remember, the seeds of malice may be sown, but with truth, courage, and an unwavering heart, justice will always prevail, and love in its purest form will always find a way to bloom.